Prioritizing family and friends over work. That's what Singaporeans are saying they would do in a new survey, which also finds that their perceived importance of work has fallen over the years. The report by the Institute of Policy Studies polled over 2,000 people on evolving attitudes and values on topics like social and moral issues. The data was collected from November 2019 to March last year. The survey found that residents here have strong values of filial piety. Close to 90% of them agree that their main goal is to make their parents proud. Those numbers are among the highest globally, just behind Malaysia and Thailand. On gender equality, there has been greater acceptance over the years towards female politicians. More than 70% of respondents disagree that men make better political leaders than women. And this is a contrast from previous surveys. Singapore also remains a fairly conservative society. Nearly 60% of respondents indicated that homosexual sex was never or seldom justifiable. In general, younger respondents and the better educated had more liberal attitudes. And for a closer look at this, we're joined by Dr. Mathew Mathews from the Institute of Policy Studies. Dr. Mathews, interestingly, prioritization of work seems to have declined over the years. Is this as you would expect?
Well, I think what has happened is that, we're not saying that Singaporeans don't care about work. They still care about work. And in fact, in our polls, Singaporeans did say that if you don't work, you'll become lazy. So there is still a strong work ethos. But what it is that we don't want work to dominate our lives. And increasingly, I think we realize that there'd not be much point to just spend all of our life just pursuing work when there are many other options. There's possibilities for leisure, there's possibility for spending time with our families. And so I think in the prioritization, especially for younger people, people are saying, one of the questions was, if this thing happened 10 years time, you would have less time for work. Would it be all right for you? And many people don't mind that in Singapore. So increasingly, I think we're accepting the fact that there are many more facets of our life besides just work.
Dr. Mathews, overall, Singapore remains a fairly conservative society. Why is that so? And do we expect this to perhaps change as Singapore continues to develop economically? What stood out for you?
Well, we must first take a context that our values, especially our conservative values, do come from several sources. It, of course, comes from upbringing. It comes from our religious upbringing, school upbringing, what we listen and hear. And if you think about it, after nation building, 70s, 1980s, most of us who are at least 40 or so years old, we've heard quite a lot of discussion about Asian values, how we're a little different from Western societies. There's something about our Asian culture which is important to preserve and keep, and it helps our societies to run well. So all these things have been entrenched into us, and so we care a little bit about that. And so, of course, with this notion of Asian values, there's been a lot of prioritization on family. So when you look at alternative ways of doing family, I think many older Singaporeans find it quite difficult and to accept that. Of course, among younger people, you do have a different way of looking at things and increased exposure. They see how, alternative family forms seem to be able to be sustained. They can function. So they're a little bit more open to accept that compared to those slightly older.
And how much of an impact do you think that COVID-19 and the pandemic has had on these results?
You can expect that values don't shift so quickly. Pandemic is a very important aspect, but the fact that values that you have entrenched your life, what you believe is important, whether it's security, whether you believe family is important, those things are quite stable traits and they hold on even when you go through some of these things. What might change, for instance, is how much people expect, for instance, the government to do. One of the points which came out to us is that more and more Singaporeans, if you compare it over the waves, are saying that the government needs to do, we want the government to take care of those who fall behind, those who are not doing so well. And I'm sure that this will amplify, especially in COVID and perhaps some of the economic difficulties. This might be something that people are changing their mind or thinking more about how much more the government should come into play.
Another interesting finding, Dr. Mathews, over half of respondents disagreed that men should be prioritised over women for hiring during a jobs scarce climate. What is the driving factor behind that? I mean, has it got anything to do with the fact that a large proportion of women are already part of the workforce?
You know, I mean, when we looked at those figures, we did notice something. One, actually, I mean, compared to many other parts of Asia, for instance, Singaporeans actually feel that female executives, business executives, are just as competent as male executives. So, I mean, we do regard, women and men the same level there. But I think what is really getting at is this whole idea about what happens when at the crunch, or there's a job loss. Is it father or mother who gives up their job to stay at home? And I think what you'd see here is that more Singaporeans are still accustomed to what is traditional, that women would stay at home and men would go out to work. It's very important for men still to be seen as, even though in practice, most of our families are dual income, but still I think the idea about, for instance, house husbands, is still very, very small number of people kind of accept that. But a housewife, I mean, people, a homemaker, people accept that. So I think we still have some way to go when it comes to looking at both genders as being both able to be at home and be out at the workplace.
All right, May, thanks for sharing your thoughts with us and the report as well. Dr. Mathew Mathews from the Institute of Policy Studies.